Willow the Firestarter used to be one of the most lackluster characters in Don't Starve Together. Getting killed by fire was such a rare occurrence that her immunity to it didn't come into play very often. In my opinion, the most unique thing about her was Giant Bernie, which looked cool, but paled in comparison to other followers like Abigail or Merman Spider armies. So the problem with Willow was that despite being a character who supposedly is all about fire, her uniqueness came mostly from Bernie and her ability to manage insanity. After getting her skill tree, the focus of Willow's gameplay has shifted back to power kinetics. Some of these skills impact day-to-day survival, but I'd argue most expand Willow's combat arsenal, resulting in a Willow that's way stronger than she was before. Having insane amounts of health, unique abilities, and devastating attacks, the raid bosses are the toughest challenges DSD has to offer. If you want to know how the new and improved Willow fares against them, then stick around as I demonstrate how to be an S Tier Willow. Before the run starts, let's go over the game plan. Willow has the same health, hunger, and base damage as Wilson, but also much less sanity. Although having less sanity isn't a big deal, it's still a downside for Willow because it means Bernie will have to fight more Terror Beaks. Her other downside is her vulnerability to freeze damage. Freezing doesn't just deal more damage to her, but it also reduces her sanity. This is not really a big deal since Willow has a bunch of solutions to keep her warm, and freezing shouldn't be an issue if you're at the point of fighting raid bosses, but it does make tanking freezing to save time a lot less viable. Other than that, she's completely immune to fire damage, which not only comes in handy against bosses like Klaus and Dragonfly, but it works well with her controlled burn skill, since it stops her fires from spreading, and saves the loot, making lighting enemies on fire a much more viable strategy. Willow also gains sanity from fire sources. This combined with her fire immunity lets her do neat things like rapidly raise her sanity anytime she wants to, just by carrying a stack of rope around. Willow also takes no damage from putting out smoldering objects, but it's not all that impactful considering her Hungry Lighter skill does the exact same thing to even flames in an area. Now that we've got Willow's general perks out of the way, let's talk about her skill tree. Half of Willow's new abilities are categorized as lighter skills. As mentioned before, Controlled Burn is extremely good as it makes setting enemies on fire a much more viable combat option, since it preserves the loot and stops other things from burning. Killing enemies while they are on fire is the only way to get the embers that power Willow's unique fire spells, so Controlled Burn is a must-have. Burn duration is another good choice, since fire often panics non-boss mobs, making them unable to do anything, so this skill simply extends the duration of this effect. I don't pick Firefighter, since the purpose of setting enemies ablaze isn't to kill them with burn damage, and there are some enemies like Bee Queen's Grumblebees that are better kept alive. Burning Lighter 1, 2, and 3 just increase the light radius of the lighter. I don't pick any of these since lanterns are better, as they are refuelable and can be dropped on the ground. Hungry Lighter's fire stopping ability is a little niche, but it's still a necessary skill because it's required to learn Ember Tender, which allows Willow to pick up the embers that power her spells. I pick all 3 of Willow's spells because each of them are very useful. Spontaneous Combustion costs 4 embers and sets all flammable mobs in the area ablaze. It's great for swarming mobs, and it's required to farm massive amounts of embers quickly. The Fireball skill essentially creates a dwarf star that lasts for 1 day instead of 4. The skill can be replaced by using a star caller, but it saves an inventory slot, and a 1-day light/heat source makes more sense for a nomadic playstyle. Burning Frenzy is the most straightforward of all Willow spells, as it boosts all Willow's normal damage by 25% if she's attacking a burning target. The second half of Willow's skill tree is made up of her Bernie skills. I think the skills that you pick in this skill tree are a lot more subject to your playstyle and preference than the lighter skills, but I'll just tell you what I pick and why. I definitely go with Patch Up 1 and 2. These skills give Bernie HP regeneration while he's giant, with the rate maxing out at 2 HP per second. These skills not only greatly increase the amount of time Bernie lasts in a fight, but he can also potentially regenerate all his HP outside of fights if you keep the nightmare creatures away. Barely Sane 1 and 2 are also my picks, as picking both will let Bernie go big when Willow's sanity is less than 60 instead of 20. This means Willow doesn't even have to go insane to use Bernie, which drastically reduces the amount of nightmare creatures that he will be hassled by. Accelerant 1 and 2 increase Bernie's movement speed to the point that he's even faster than Beefalo speed. However, Bernie is a tank, so I don't really see additional movement speed in combat as a big deal. I think Hot-Headed is probably one of the most useless skills, since dropping your sanity below the 50% mark is easy to do, and it kind of conflicts with Bernie's utility of combating insanity. I picked Tough Stuffing 1 and 2 because 600 extra health means Bernie stays in the fight longer, which lets him heal longer and saves me on sewing kits. I don't use Burning Bernie because it requires 8 Bernie skills to unlock, which means I would have to give up on the affinity skills, and Willow has much better ways for dealing with hordes. With that, we finally come to the affinity skills. Shadow and Lunar Bernie are identical, as both give Bernie a +5 damage boost and make him stronger against the opposing affinity. This is by far the best Bernie skill, because it gives him planar entity protection, which ends up more or less doubling his HP against bosses. As for the affinity spells, Shadowfire Razor unleashes a bunch of homing missiles that deal good damage to a single target, while Lunar Fire emits a stream of blue flames that deals damage over an area for a few seconds. Shadowfire is better for singular targets, but Lunar Flames are my preferred pick, due to the utility of having a reliable long-range AoE option that also deals good damage. So that's what I think is the overall best skill tree for Willow, and therefore is what I'll be using. With that out of the way, let's finally get into the run. So after picking up all the right skills, I spawned in as Willow. Immediately I could tell from the twigs lying around and lack of grass that this was a grass, gecko, and twiggy tree world, which is more often than not better for these kinds of runs. After picking up a bunch of grass, twigs, and a few flint, I headed to the mosaic biome and mined gold veins to get even more flint, as well as gold and rocks. I also got a bunch of grass from the flock of geckos that always spawns near the critter den. The shadow set piece was there as well, which meant I had already found one of the most important landmarks of the run. After collecting enough materials, I explored the mosaic wormhole that took me to the picking biome. Here I hammered pig heads, chopped trees, and destroyed houses for their materials. Since Willow spawns in with her lighter, I didn't need to craft a torch, and didn't have to worry about my fires going out of control due to the controlled burn skill. Before night ended, I crafted a science machine and prototyped a backpack, razor, shovel, beefalo bell, and finally an alchemy engine, before hammering the science machine to get back the materials. On day 2, I exited the burstnut biome and found a small savanna in the mandrake forest shortly after. There I fed one of the beefalos a ton of carrots to keep it taming. Each carrot restores 12.5 hunger, so 20 of them should keep my beefalo taming for almost an entire day. After that I explored more of the forest while hammering pig houses for materials and cutting down twiggy trees so I could set up a twig farm when I eventually settled down at base. Towards the end of day 2, I placed an alchemy engine near the crossroads since it was pretty central and next to a bunch of beehives, which are great quick sources of embers. After dusk turned to night, I went back to the beefalo to shave them while they slept to get beefalo wool. On day 3, I used the beefalo wool, pig skin, and gold nuggets to craft a saddle, which meant I could now fly around the map at beefalo speed. I then spent the rest of the day in the mandrake forest getting charcoal for crockpots, hammering pig houses, killing spiders, and finally getting a few living logs from cutting down the totally normal tree. On day 4, I built my crockpots and started turning my twigs into steam twigs, since just one of these would keep my beefalo taming for a third of a game day, even if I'm not riding it. While the twigs were cooking, I killed a bunch of bees after setting them on fire with the lighter. I don't need too much embers for the ruins, so once I have almost half a stack, I headed to the mosaic and killed tall birds so I could turn their meat into ham bats, and finally crafted a piggyback and the golden pickaxe and axe at the alchemy engine. On day 5, with my ruins prep finally completed, I headed to the caves. My objectives down here are the same as usual for these kinds of runs. My main goals are to defeat the Ancient Guardian and bring a Starcaller staff back up to the surface as quickly as possible. So I immediately started searching for the muddy biome since it's at the center of the map and connected to everything. After running through a village of hostile bunnymen, I found it and started harvesting a full stack of light bulbs since they are much more abundant here than in the ruins. Each light bulb restores the lantern's capacity by 19%, which translates to 90 seconds of light. So a full stack of 40 light bulbs will give me an hour of light, which is more than enough for this brief stay in the caves. After running around the muddy biome for a bit, I saw nightmare fishers off in the distance, which meant I had found the wilds. In my opinion, the wilds is just as dangerous as the ruins, since you have to deal with slurpers, nightmare creatures, deadworms, and hordes of splomonkeys. The wilds is great if you're taming beefalo since it has a ton of lichen that you can pick, each granting 12.5 hunger, allowing your beefalo to be fed even when you're off doing other things like mining statues or fighting enemies. For Willow, the wilds is especially important because they are home to shadow splomonkeys. Killing one of these guarantees 1 beard hair, which means after killing 2, I can combine the hair with the beefalo wool and silk to make a second Bernie. If you're playing Willow, I highly recommend making a backup Bernie. It's true that one use of the sewing kit can completely restore Bernie to full health, so you might think bringing a sewing kit is enough. However, if you're in the middle of a fight, especially against a raid boss, every second counts. Having a backup Bernie in your inventory that you can immediately activate is way better than having to retrieve Bernie's body and using a sewing kit on it while having to deal with a boss and terror beaks. So please save yourself the trouble and craft a second Bernie. Anyways, after getting my second Bernie, I headed through the wilds, past the monkey village, and into the first ruins branch. Fortunately, the labyrinth was right at the entrance, so after dropping off Hutch and a bunch of items I don't need for AG, I headed in. The labyrinth is littered with webs that will summon a bunch of dangling dwellers if stepped on. The trick to getting by them is to run on the edges of the labyrinth path, since doing this will not alert the spiders. In my search for AG, I stumbled upon a bunch of chests which I opened for their loot. Usually they contain thulosite or gems, but sometimes they have equipment like football helmets or log suits, both of which will be useful for the AG battle. After finding the boss's arena, I brought my beefalo to a safe area and fed it a ton of lichen, so it will continue to tame. My sanity was at 0, and I didn't want nightmare creatures interfering with the AG fight, so I summoned Giant Bernie and killed both Crawling Horrors and Terror Beaks to bring it back up. The cool thing about Bernie is that with the Barely Sane skills, he makes passive Crawling Horrors aggressive, which lets you increase your sanity by fighting them even if you're not insane. So after bringing my sanity up a bit, I entered the Ancient Guardian's arena to start the first boss fight. The Ancient Guardian has 10,000 HP and in this first phase will either charge at you if you're at a distance or try to bite you if you're too close. Each attack deals 100 damage, so with my limited healing and basic armor, this fight can still be dangerous. What I usually do is light up the arena with a Starcaller staff, or at the very least have a Magi to boost my speed and give me a constant, albeit small, source of light. However, Willow's controlled burn perk lets me use the Ancient Guardian himself as a light source, since there is now no downside for setting him on fire. Combine that with burn duration, and one whack with the lighter gives me 30 seconds of light, so after he stops burning, I just set him on fire again. The way to fight AG is to lead his charges into pillars or pillar fragments that drop from the ceiling, which stun him for a duration proportional to how long he was charging for. I'm not using Bernie in this fight because it would be very hard to lure AG into obstacles with Bernie distracting him. Once AG's HP drops to 6,000, he enters phase 2. He will now spawn shadow tentacles from time to time and gains jump attack that he will use if he doesn't get stunned after charging. He's now considered shadow aligned, which means lunar aligned Willow deals 10% more damage to him. I haven't mentioned this yet, but I'm also using the Burning Frenzy spell, which costs 2 embers and increases Willow's normal damage by 25% on burning targets for 60 seconds. This is why my fresh Hambat was doing 74 damage per hit in phase 1 and 81 damage per hit in phase 2. After a brief 2-minute fight, AG is defeated. Since he was lit up when he died, he also drops 8 embers as well as cooked meats instead of raw ones. I got some good loot this time, as a large ornate chest had a Lazy Explorer, a Magi, a Thulosite crown, a bunch of green gems, and Thulosite. After taking all the good stuff, I left the labyrinth, picked up Hutch, and continued exploring the ruins in search of a pseudoscience station. I came across a broken one, but instead of spending 6 Thulosite to repair it, I decided to see if I could find the completed one. Sure enough, the rocky path led to the completed station. This station is always guarded by 2 bishops. Most characters would have to eat a bunch of damage if they wanted to beat both without destroying the loot. Willow is an exception to this, because Bernie draws her aggro, and a single hit from the lighter sends them into panic for a very long time. While panicked, they can't fight back, so I just kill both with a Hambat and pick up the purple gems that they drop. It was now time to craft. I turned all the Thulosite fragments into Thulosite, made a pick/axe, a Starcaller staff, a deconstruction staff, and a second Thulosite crown. With that, I had completed all of my ruins objectives and started my journey back to the surface. On my way out of the ruins branch, I remembered to kill a resting Har for the chair blueprint, since this would let me complete one of Pearl's chores later. While trying to find an exit, I came across the Blue Mushtree Forest, which is the second most important cave biome after the ruins. After finding the cave entrance, I was finally out by the end of day 8. The next major objective on my list was to transform my Starcaller staff into a Mooncaller. In order to do that, I needed to find the Moonstone. So that's basically what I did for the next few days. My search took me through the swamp and to the Dragonfly Desert. The Dragonfly Desert wormhole led me to probably the most important location for Willow, the Killer Bee biome. Each killer beehive spawns a swarm of aggressive bees whenever Willow gets near it. You can easily get dozens of bees to follow you by riding around these hives, and once they're grouped up, you can set them all on fire with the spontaneous combustion spell. The bees will quickly drop dead since they are taking fire damage from themselves and all the bees around them, resulting in the entire area being littered with embers. Doing this, I was able to go from 23 embers to 72 in less than a minute. After exploring the rest of the biome, I came across the Oasis Desert, which led to the Spider Quarry, which took me back to the ponds near my base. I spent the rest of day 10 searching the picking biome, the edges of the swamp, and the Dragonfly Desert. Towards the end of the day, I was getting kind of worried that I wouldn't fight it in time, but the Moonstone Forest ended up being adjacent to the mosaic. At the start of day 11, I set up walls around the Moonstone, and at night, I activated Bernie and used him to plug up the entrance. After obtaining the Mooncaller staff, I mined the petrified mobs for moon rocks and headed back into the caves. This time I will be going into the archives instead of the ruins. Since I had found the blue mush tree forest earlier, I headed straight towards there and rode through the lunar grotto, mined my way through the archive entrance, and bolted through the maze in search for the iridescent gems. Unfortunately, I had to basically explore the entire archives before finding it. However, at least I knew where the puzzle and the correct fountain of knowledge were. After deconstructing the Mooncaller staff and socketing the gem to activate the archives, I got the astro detector at the fountain of knowledge with the hourglass shape, and unlocked it to obtain the blueprint. Before leaving, I mined 2 statues, because each drops the materials needed to craft a detector, and headed out of the caves. Back at base, I started searching for the sanctum pieces, and what do you know, the first one was right next to my Twiggy tree farm. The second one also wasn't that far, and I had both of them dug up before day 15. With the sanctum pieces dug up, the astro detectors now pointed to the altar pieces on Lunar Island, so I knew exactly where I had to go. Unfortunately, Lunar was off the coast of the Killer Bee biome, which was located at the very edge of the map. After riding to the coast, I placed the boat in the water and started paddling in the direction the astro detectors pointed. On the way there, I got one of Pearl's messages in a bottle, which revealed her island was close to the center of the map. I got to Lunar Island right as dusk turned to night. Lunar Island is where Bernie's patch-up skills really shine. As you know, the skill gives Bernie health regeneration when he's in giant form. If you use Bernie while on the mainland, the nightmare creatures he will be constantly fighting out-damages his healing. However, no nightmare creatures spawn on Lunar Island, which means as long as Willow's enlightenment is low enough to activate him, Bernie can slowly recover all his health while I'm here. So while Bernie recovered, I mined and assembled the 3 altar pieces and crafted 3 glass cutters and 4 moon glass axes. The glass cutters have double the durability against the first 2 raid bosses we'll be fighting, so 3 will be enough. The glass axes are able to fell trees way faster than regular ones, and they'll come in handy against 2 bosses that I'll eventually need to beat. After I was done crafting, I picked up 2 stacks of kelp fronds so I could replant them near base, hopped back onto the boat, and paddled back to the mainland. Back on shore, I deactivated Bernie, and, thanks to patch up, got him back at 100% durability, despite being at 53% a day earlier. At base, I made a bird cage, planted all the kelp, and started assembling the pieces. I had gotten the bishop head earlier from the Moonstone forest, the knight head was in the picking biome, and the rook nose was in the swamp. I had all 3 assembled by day 19. I used a little remaining time before winter to dig up bushes for Pearl's chores, and used Willow's lunar flames to mow down an army of frogs so I could turn their legs into pierogies. The last thing I did was collect fossil pieces from cave spider dens. This was made much easier by the fact that Bernie plus fire damage really counters these kinds of swarming mobs. On day 21, I was back at base with the 8 fossil pieces. Since it was winter, I started to really take advantage of Willow's fireball skill, since at just the cost of 2 embers, it gave me a strong source of heat and light that lasts for a day. I cooked 2 steam twigs in the crock pot because I will need to be off my beefalo for quite a while in order to deal with the first raid boss in this run. After feeding it both, I dropped the beefalo bell at spawn so that when I got off of it, my beefalo would run far away from the boss fight. I used another fireball so that heat and light wouldn't be a concern, activated Bernie, completed all the sculptures, and mined the knight statue to summon the shadow pieces. At level 1, the shadow pieces are just regular mobs and not bosses, so Bernie successfully taunts them, causing both the bishop and rook to ignore me completely. After the knight goes down, the other 2 pieces level up into boss tier enemies. Bernie's taunts will no longer work on them, however it's still possible for him to draw their aggro if he hit them recently. It doesn't really matter because both pieces teleport, so unless I'm out of their range, I assume every attack is aimed at me. I take out the bishop instead of the rook since I have the speed to completely dodge the ladder at level 3. Usually I'd have to worry about sanity, since getting pestered by nightmare creatures while fighting the pieces greatly increases the difficulty, however Bernie takes insanity out of the equation. After the level 2 bishop dies, the rook achieves its final form. The strategy for fighting it is the same as with Wilson. I dodge his attacks by combining the speed of the Magi, Walking Cane, and Road, and animation cancel hits on him while he's vulnerable. The glass cutters normally deal 68 damage per hit, however since Willow is lunar aligned, she deals 74 damage. Unfortunately, the shadow pieces are one of several bosses that cannot be set on fire, so Willow can't utilize her full damage potential against it. However, I still consider her a good matchup, since Bernie nullifies insanity and also adds quite a bit of DPS with 60 damage hits every 2 seconds. After a 2.5 minute fight, the rook dies, meaning I've beaten the first raid boss of this run. With the extra damage from Bernie and Willow's lunar alignment, The fight basically costs a single glass cutter, which is a pretty good deal in my opinion. I then brought the Shadow Atrium back to base, and started working on the final preparations for probably the most difficult boss in the game, Fuelweaver. With the kelp I planted at base, eggs I got from my bird, and monster meat, I made a bunch of pierogi which covers all the healing I'll need. I then used the last of my construction amulet to craft a sewing kit. The sewing kit is another must-have for Willow if you're doing a lot of boss killing, since a single use allows you to restore Bernie back to 100%. My Beefalo fully tamed as a rider, which is definitely the one that you want if you're playing a damage dealer like Willow. After making an umbrella in case it starts raining in the caves, I headed to the depths once again. I want to activate the cave rifts, so I need to beat the Nightmare Werepig before confronting Fuelweaver. So after making a fireball and putting my Beefalo away, I freed him by using the pick/axe to vibrate all 3 pillars. The cool thing about Willow is that you don't actually need to be insane to kill the shadlings. Like the passive crawling horrors that appear after your character's sanity is below 50%, Bernie technically draws the aggro of shadlings, which allows you to safely target them without dealing with the hostile nightmares. The Nightmare Werepig has 10,000 HP and in his first phase has only one attack, which is his body slam. If he misses 3 times in a row, he will enter his fatigue state, allowing you to land a bunch of hits on him. I think I get around 15 if I'm animation cancelling. So in phase 1, I fight him the typical way that all characters do, except I try to lead his slams away from Bernie. This boss has one of the strongest insanity auras in the game, which is why I'd recommend bringing sanity food or the Bequeen crown to this fight. However, Bernie lets Willow completely ignore this, so sanity is far less of an issue for her. Once the Nightmare Werepig's HP drops below 5,000, he enters his second phase, where he craters the ground with smashes. The smashes are the only thing that can break the pillars, so I deactivate Bernie and bait him into doing that. After all 3 pillars are destroyed, I bring Bernie back out and start fighting him again. Usually dealing damage to him in this smashing phase is much more annoying since he doesn't get fatigued, but Willow can bypass this with her lunar flames since they lock him in place, and the flames can deal almost 1,000 damage to him due to a shadow alignment, making phase 2 go by much quicker. After his HP drops to 3,000, the Nightmare Werepig enters his final phase, where he does a combination of both ground smashes and body slams. I basically fight him the same way I did in phase 1, which is by dodging the slams 3 times while directing him away from Bernie. After the Nightmare Werepig is defeated, he drops a bunch of Dreadstone blueprints and pure horror. Towards the end of the fight, I heard the growls of a Depthworm wave, so I'm glad I was able to finish the boss before I had to deal with interference. I learned the blueprints and brought the pure horror and Dreadstone all the way to the completed pseudoscience station in the ruins. There I crafted 4 more Thudicite crowns, and I was finally ready to take on Fuelweaver. I had already found the area I suspected was the Atrium Bridge, so I placed the gate in between 2 walls and cheated myself into the void. Sure enough, the Atrium maze soon popped up on my screen. After arriving at the Atrium, I realized I forgot to pick up the ancient key, so I rode back to the completed station to pick it up. Then I returned to the Atrium Bridge, cheated myself into the void, and teleported back into the arena. Plugging in the ancient key illuminated the biome, but I still had to worry about freezing, so I placed a fireball at the center and organized my inventory. Once everything was ready, I inserted the Shadow Atrium into the skeleton to summon Fuelweaver. The Ancient Fuelweaver is one of the 2 final bosses in the game, although I personally think he's much more difficult than the other. In phase 1, he will attack with skull bashes that deal 100 damage, will do a bone spiral attack that drops daggers on your head, and a snare attack that will trap you for 10 seconds. You can teleport out of the cage, but it's also possible to dodge it if you get out of its AoE right before you slam to ground. If you dodged it in phase 1, Fuelweaver will typically not use it for a while, however this doesn't work with Bernie, so as Willow, expect continuous bone cages. Once Fuelweaver's HP drops below 10,000, he enters phase 2, where he immediately becomes invincible and summons his Woven Shadows. If a Woven Shadow gets to him, he will regenerate 400 HP, so you really want to prevent him from eating these. The typical strategy is to throw tornadoes at Fuelweaver with a Weather Paint item. However, Willow doesn't need it, since her Lunar Flames gives her sustained AoE attacks that cover a large area. So after most of the minions spawn in, I clear them out with Lunar Fire and destroy all the unseen hands to drop Fuelweaver's shield. After his shield is dropped, he will be vulnerable for 20 seconds, so I take advantage of this and attack him as much as I can while just eating his hits. Thanks to Bernie, I can stay insane throughout the fight without having to worry about nightmare creatures. However, Fuelweaver will use his mind control attack from time to time. To counter this, all I need to do is teleport with the Lazy Explorer, since the teleport causes Fuelweaver to stop his attack. Once the 20 seconds are up, Fuelweaver puts up his shield and summons another round of Woven Shadows. Because he hits so hard and so fast, Bernie actually dies, but that's not a big deal since I can immediately bring Bernie back with the backup. One thing to be aware of when using Lunar Fire is that Fuelweaver can cancel out the attack if he hits Willow with Bone Snare or if she gets pushed back by his Force Field, so I make sure to use it at a distance and only when he's either bending down to eat or immediately after a Bone Snare. After a mere 3.5 minute fight, Fuelweaver is brought down at the start of day 26, dropping the Bone Helm and Bone Armor, and causing the Shadow Hand to appear. After giving the hand 5 Dreadstone, we are rewarded with a Charlie cutscene, signaling the start of the cave rifts. With Fuelweaver vanquished and the rifts activated, I hopped back onto my Beefalo and void walked back to the ruins where everything respawned. After dealing with the 2 clockwork bishops guarding the completed station, I grabbed the handbat that I used against the Nightmare Werepig, rode back to the labyrinth, and fought the Ancient Guardian again, except this time I had better armor and way more speed. After looting the second chest he dropped for green gems, Tulasite, a club, and a fresh Lazy Explorer, I headed out of the ruins, back to the muddy biome, and to the lunar grotto in order to hunt mush gnomes for living logs. While Bernie held off the terror beaks and greater gestalts, I killed 2 gnomes, which netted me 4 living logs, which was more than enough for the deconstruction staffs that I needed to make. Then I went back to the completed station in the ruins and crafted a deconstruction staff and a bunch of construction amulets, because once I kill the Inkblight trio, I'm going to want to duplicate their drops to get Willow's highest damage. I killed Fuelweaver at the start of day 26, so after spending a few more days killing bishops in the ruins for their purple gems, and searching the caves for Toadstool spawner, one of the nightmare fissures in the stalagmite biome turned red, which means it's time to beat some Inkblights. The Inkblights are very dangerous, since their planar attacks deal a lot of damage through armor, and the big one called Rasp can one-shot with his leap attack. However, Willow easily beats them with Bernie and Lunar Flames, since Bernie attracts these non-boss entities, and Lunar Flames deals good damage from a distance. I leave Shriek for last, since he's the easiest to kite, and pick up the Dark Tatters and Pure Horror. With these materials and the Shadowcraft Plinth, I can finally head out of the caves. Back at base, I use the construction amulets to make void robes at half the material cost, and get the full materials back with the deconstruction staff. After doing this about a dozen times, I ended up with 22 Pure Horror and 24 Tatters. I then used the last of the Construction Amulet to craft the Shadow Reaper, Umbrella, and Void Cowl, and spent the rest on Void Repair Kits. Now that I have the strongest weapon available for Willow, I'm ready to take on the rest of the raid bosses. After making a brief stop in the Killer Bee biome to replenish my Ember reserves, I started searching for Klaus in the No-Eye Deer, since Klaus is only available during winter. I found the loot stash in the Picking biome, but no deer. Before heading to the Mosaic to search for them, I used one of the glass axes to chop down all the trees around the loot stash because the way Willow fights Klaus is greatly affected by fine-tuned positioning. The next day, I found the deer at the entrance of the Mosaic, so I took their antlers back to Klaus's stash, put my beefalo away, and inserted the antler to summon the third raid boss. Klaus has 10,000 HP in his first phase and will attack with double swipes, each dealing 37.5 damage. I immediately set him on fire and used Burning Frenzy to maximize my damage with the Shadow Reaper. With all of that combined, Willow ends up hitting for 100 damage per swing, which doesn't quite measure up to top tiers like Wanda or Wolfgang, but it's still very high. The cool thing about the Klaus fight is that Willow can completely ignore the red deer spells, due to her immunity to flames. The ice spell can be a problem, because the freezing does extra damage to her and will also instantly put out fires. To counter this, all Willow has to do is make some distance when the blue deer begins its cast, run back, and light it on fire. The blue deer is weak to fire, so it will remain panicked and out of the fight for 30 seconds, which means Willow will only have to contend with the fire spell, which she is immune to. Once Klaus' HP drops to 5,000, he summons two Krampus. Lunar Flame makes short work of them, then it's back to fighting Klaus. The reason I cut down all the trees beforehand is because the blue gem deer constantly running around causes the red deer to reposition itself. If you don't keep a close eye on where it's at, it could get close enough to Willow and start attacking her. At 50 damage per hit, the deer's attacks are stronger than Klaus's, so you really don't want to get hit a lot by these guys. After Klaus' HP drains to 0, he dies and gets revived by the life-giving amulet with 5,000. In this phase, he gains a high-speed pounce attack and screams from time to time. The strategy is very similar to phase 1, except I equip the Lazy Explorer and run away from him when he's about to pounce. After a short 3-minute fight, Klaus dies, dropping both the key to his loot stash and a bunch of embers. I did get a Bee Queen crown, but Willow is probably the last character who would use it, considering she has Bernie, and the Void Cowl is required to buff the Shadow Reaper's damage, so I just take the wax paper and gems and head straight to the next boss, Dragonfly. The Dragonfly Desert wasn't far, as it was only separated from the Picking biome by the swamp. So after a brief ride, I got to the desert, put my beefalo away, lit up the arena with a fireball, activated Bernie, and started the fight. Dragonfly has 27,500 HP and deals 75 damage per hit. Its attacks are much more difficult to kite than typical enemies, since it will fly at you while attacking if you kite it too early. To prevent this from happening, you have to dodge at the very last second. The timing for this with regular attack speed is 6 hits and then dodge, but since I'm animation cancelling, I'm able to kick it up to 7 hits. Unfortunately, Dragonfly cannot be set on fire, which means I cannot boost my damage with Burning Frenzy. However, I do have Bernie here, who is dealing 55 damage every 2 seconds. Combine that with the 88 damage hits that my Shadow Reaper achieves, and Willow is effectively dealing about 100 damage per hit, which is again not quite top tier, but still very solid. After draining Dragonfly to 22,000 HP, she flies off to spawn Lave. Bernie trivializes this, since he redirects their aggro as long as they aren't too far away from him. While they gang up on Bernie, Willow is free to kill them all with the Shadow Reaper. Each Lave deals 50 damage per hit, so you want to kill them as soon as possible to preserve Bernie. After Dragonfly spawns 5 Lave, she flies back to Willow in order to attack. I put her to sleep with a pan flute before she gets close, and kill the rest of the Lave before she wakes up. If you kill the last Lave that was spawned, Dragonfly is guaranteed to not fly off to spawn more, which greatly shortens the duration of the fight. Dropping her health below half causes Dragonfly to fly off and spawn her second batch of minions. Her second batch will consist of 6 larvae instead of 5, and her third batch will have 7, but other than that, the strategy to deal with her remains the same. After a 5-minute fight, Dragonfly dies, dropping a bunch of gems and meat. After taking the useful stuff, I headed back to base and cooked more pierogi because I'd soon have to face Bee Queen. Before I could fight her, I needed to get some strong body armor to pair with my Void Cowl, so I decided to fight Toadstool first. Bringing the remaining glass axes with me, I headed down to the caves and to the Toadstool spawner that was attached to the rock lobster biome. It was acid raining in the caves, but luckily it began light, so I didn't take much damage while traveling to the arena. After getting there, I activated the umbrella to give me a safety bubble free from the damaging effects of acid rain, summoned Bernie, and put my beefalo away. I then dropped my piggyback just outside the barrier and chopped Toadstool's cap to start the fight. With 52,500 HP, Toadstool is by far the beefiest of all the bosses in this run. In his first 2 phases, he attacks by dropping volleys of explosive boom shrooms and planting spore bombs on my head that turn into damaging spore clouds. I just step away right before the boom shrooms detonate and make sure the spore clouds are not near Bernie, since their constant damage can really wear down his durability. After Toadstool begins to spawn spore caps, I left click on Bernie to deactivate him and start pre-chopping the trees. The glass axes can knock Toadstool's spore caps down in 4 hits, so I stop after 3. Once Toadstool is done spawning all 8, I lure him behind the pond that is closest to the center of the arena, hand-flute him to sleep, and start chopping down all of his trees. The spore caps greatly increase Toadstool's damage, defenses, and speed, so it's important to cut them all down. It's also important to note that if Toadstool is on fire, he'll instantly wake up, so I make sure to not set him on fire after it goes out. After all the trees are cut down, it's back to fighting Toad. Since Toadstool can get set on fire, I can use Burning Frenzy to boost Willow's Reaper damage to 99, add the small tick damage from fire and constant attacks from Bernie, and the damage Willow is dealing begins to approach the top tiers, like Wolfgang with a Hamlet. After 45 seconds of fighting, Toadstool begins to slowly walk back to the center for 15 seconds before summoning another set of trees. By positioning Toadstool behind the pond, it gets held in place, which lets Willow and Bernie wail away at it for free. I noticed that Bernie was getting harassed by 2 Terrorbeaks, which normally wouldn't be an issue since Toadstool's bombs would take care of them. However, Toadstool was in its passive phase, so I decided to clear them out with Lunar Fire in order to preserve Bernie's HP. This put my sanity above 60, which deactivated Bernie, so I had to wait for my sanity to lower before I could use him again. Once Toadstool's HP dips below 21,000, it enters its final phase where it gains a double stomp attack that deals AoE damage and drops minerals from the ceiling. Like the boom shrooms, Bernie can just tank all this damage since its planar protection, boosted HP, and regeneration makes him so beefy. The attack to really watch out for are the spore bombs since they deal rapid low damage over a long period of time, and the lower the damage, the less it's reduced by Bernie's planar protection. After a little over a game day, Toadstool is defeated. He ended up bringing my second Bernie down to 16%, which just goes to show how much more dangerous Phase 3 is. However, overall, using less than 2 Bernies makes for a pretty solid Toadstool fight. Although mushlights are one of my favorite structures, they aren't all that useful for a boss rush, so I used the blueprints and mushrooms to increase my sanity and head out of the rock lobster biome. I needed to head to the ruins to make 2 Thulosite suits. Each suit has 12,600 HP and gives Willow 90% armor, which isn't quite as high as Marble suits, but it's still up there, and unlike Marble, it won't slow Willow down. Ideally, I should have crafted these while I was hanging out in the ruins during winter, but I forgot. With the 2 suits, I rode out of the caves and back to base. I then did a bit of potato farming. I know that you don't need to do this anymore since you can find potatoes from the junkyard, but it's not guaranteed, and I had really bad luck with them in one of my previous runs. After making more pierogi and combining them with what I had in the fridge, I headed off to fight Bee Queen. There is more than one way for Willow to fight Bee Queen. It's possible to just bring a ton of embers, keep your distance, and spam Lunar Flame over and over again, since it takes out all her grumbles while dealing about 800 damage per use. This method is totally viable, however it's a bit time consuming, since Lunar Flames has a cooldown in between uses. I also personally think that engaging her more directly using a combination of Willow's abilities is more fun. So after clearing out the local beehives and increasing my embers, I activated Burning Frenzy and hammered Bee Queen's hive to start the fight. As soon as she summons her Grumblebees, I set everything on fire with combustion. Unlike the Queen, her Grumblebees get panicked when set on fire, which completely neutralizes them. But Grumblebees will burn for about 18 seconds, which means during that time, it's a 2 versus 1 fight. Once the Grumbles stop burning, Bernie draws their attention, meaning it's now a 1 versus 1 fight, which is still really good, since the primary goal of dealing with Bee Queen is figuring out how to remove her Grumbles from the equation. In Phase 2, she spawns double the minions. The strategy to combat this doesn't really change. The only difference is that Bernie is taking way more damage now. Since Grumblebees don't hit very hard, Bernie's planar defense doesn't do much for him, so it's advised to use another combustion to neutralize the Grumbles for a bit. Bernie is brought down right as Phase 3 begins. In this phase, Bee Queen will scream at her Grumbles, which sends them flying at super speed. Usually you would run away from her and deal damage before they get back. However, Willow does this differently. Combustion is once again the key to neutralizing her bees. I first use the Lunar Flames to kill the current set of Grumblebees so that Bee Queen spawns a fresh batch. Then after avoiding her scream, I neutralize them with combustion, which gives me an opportunity to deal damage to her. It's best to time the combustions so that she screams while the bees are on fire, as she attacks less frequently and won't fly around while this happens. Once the bees are back to normal, I kill them all with Lunar Flame so that she spawns a new set. Doing this lets me deal good damage to Bee Queen and ensures that none of the bees die prematurely from burn damage. After a 5-minute fight, Bee Queen is defeated, giving me the best drops in the game. I started the fight with almost 2 full stacks of Ember and ended with 23, so even if you're taking the more direct approach, I'd recommend going into the fight with 2 stacks. Back at base, I turned the Royal Jelly into Jelly Beans, which means I no longer have to worry about healing for the rest of the run, and dug up a bunch of grass tufts so I could replant them at base. I was almost ready to complete Pearl's quests, so I needed a lot of grass to make the rafts. Before I set sail, I decided to beat one more boss because he drops an item that helps with searching for objects at sea. So I rode my beefalo to the pig village forest, put it away, deployed the Umbrella's bubble for rain protection, and freed the Scrappy Werepig. Like the Nightmare Werepig, Scrappy has 10,000 HP, however unlike before, he can now be set on fire, which means with the help of Bernie, this is another boss that Willow can max out her DPS against. This boss does have some armor though, so instead of dealing 99 damage per hit, she's only doing 88 with Burning Frenzy. Fighting the Scrappy Werepig with Willow is way easier than with other characters for one reason, Bernie. This boss retains his powerful Insanity aura, but that's irrelevant since Bernie nullifies nightmares. Bernie also distracts this boss a lot, which means you can often just sit back and let Bernie take all the hits and swoop in to deal damage in between. After a brief 2-minute fight, the Scrappy Werepig is defeated, dropping the Horizon Expandinator, the Automechanic, and a bunch of scrap. I used the Automechanic to repair Wobot, and hammer walls for the rest of the scrap I'd need for Wagstaff's experiments, and then fought a bunch of Guardian Pigs and Spiders so I could get the terrarium and brought all of it back to base. The Wobot is really useful when you have a twiggy tree farm. By placing a single twig in a chest, you no longer have to worry about constantly collecting the fallen twigs, as Wobot will now pick them up after they are dropped by trees and stack them in the chest for you. Wobot also pairs really well with the Reaper, since the Reaper's harvesting ability combined with Wobot's auto-collect means you can pick all your grass in just a few seconds. The next day, I simply worked on getting all the items I'd need for Pearl, which at this point was just butterflies and light bulbs. After I had everything, I set sail off the coast of the Spider Quarry to Pearl's Island. Once there, the first thing I did was kill the lure plant for the first point of friendship. Then I planted all 10 flowers for point number 2. Point 3 came from planting and fertilizing 8 berry bushes, and I got the next point by filling her drying racks with kelp. Once that was done, I hopped back on the grass raft, because I now needed to do the most RNG dependent part of the run, which is find the salt formations. Sometimes they appear right next to Pearl's Island, other times you'll have to circle the entire map to find them. Either way, the Horizon Expandinator really helps out, since it increases the amount of area I can see on the screen. As I paddled further and further, it started to rain, so I deployed my Umbrella's barrier to keep dry. I also dropped Bernie, since he's basically incapable of getting attacked by nightmare creatures while you're sailing and not insane, so he's free to regenerate all his durability with a patch-up skill. Unfortunately, Bernie decided to not follow me when I hopped off the sinking raft, so he was instantly killed by the boat's destruction, and his body sunk into the ocean. If losing one of my Bernies wasn't bad enough, the rain got so heavy that lightning started to strike my boat. Fortunately, Willow can somewhat counter this, since she can just absorb all the flames with her Hungry Lighter, though every time this happens, my boat does take some damage. I was able to briefly take cover under the waterlogged biome trees, since they actually guard against lightning strikes. After paddling for almost 2 days, I found the cookie cutters at the opposite end of the map, and killed them until I had the 10 shells I needed to upgrade Pearl's house. After stopping at base to harvest more grass, and build a Presty and Shadow Manipulator in order to craft telelocator staffs, I booked it back to Pearl to finish her chores. Since daytime was almost over, I made it rain by teleporting my beefalo over and over and gave her the pretty parasol before she went back into her house. I then leveled up her house 3 times to get friendship points 6, 7, and 8. For point 9, I paddled around her island picking up all the trash with a pinch and winch, and the next day I got point 10 by building her a wooden chair which I immediately destroyed. With Pearl's quest finally out of the way, it was time to fight Crab King. At the time of this recording, Crab King hadn't been reworked yet, so he still sucks. So after catching a stack of bees in the Killer Bee biome, I used the astro detectors to lead me to his location, which happened to be off the coast of the Picking biome. Once there, I cleared out the rocks on one side, made a second raft, socketed the 8 purple gems and Pearl's Pearl, and lit the bundle wrap full of killer bees on fire. Then I quickly teleported to the other grass raft and paddled from left to right in order to dodge his geysers, while the killer bees shredded away at his HP. I activated Bernie, because after he dealt with this one crawling horror, it's just free HP with the patch-up skill. After Crab King dies, I nuke all the bees with Lunar Flame and retrieve the Celestial Tribute with a Pinch-It Winch and paddle back to the mainland. It took me over an entire day to bring all the Sanctum and Tribute pieces to the Lunar Island raft, due to Lunar being located at the edge of the map. Once I got to Lunar, I brought all the pieces to the fissures near the existing Lunar altar. Instead of socketing them immediately, I spent the rest of the day mining for moon rocks. The reason for this is that other than Celestial Champion, I still have to fight the Twins of Terror and they only appear at night. Once all the Celestial pieces are plugged in, the entire day becomes the night of a full moon, which is a perfect condition for the Twins battle, since the full moon completely illuminates the world. So at the start of the next day, I activated the Moonstorms, turning the entire day into night, and used the Corrupted Terrarium to summon the Twins of Terror. Willow doesn't fight the twins all that differently from everyone else. I separate them by pan-fluting Bolt to sleep, followed by leading Spasmatism away from its spawn point. The twins can be set on fire, so with Bernie's help, I'm approaching top tier damage. Bernie's enemy taunt should be good against the twins, since it would mean Willow can completely ignore the suspicious peepers, but I think there's something wrong with the minion AI, because more often than not, the peepers just ignore Bernie and go straight for Willow. After Spasmatism dies, I set my sight on Retinazer. It's basically the same fight, except Retinazer is easier to dodge, but spawns more minions. Although Bernie doesn't necessarily draw their aggro, Willow still counters the minion spam with her Lunar Flame. Once Retinazer is down, I paddled back to the mainland because it's time to deal with the Moonstorms. Ever since the Scrappy Werepig was introduced, you only need to get one Restrained Static to call down the Celestial Champion. Of course, since this is DST, the first Moonstorm appeared right over my base. It's not too big of a deal since I had all the ingredients to make Astragos, so after combining the potato with Moonglass, I found Wagstaff and fought off the birds while I completed the Restrained Static. Giant Bernie actually makes this event way easier because he draws the aggro from all the birds and kills them at a pretty decent pace. However, I didn't really have a way to keep my sanity low, and I didn't have the hot-headed skill, so I just did the event the normal way. To make things a little easier, I brought the Dark Sword from the Shadow Pieces fight and placed it near Wagstaff, because it actually will ward off wandering gestalts in a small area. Anyways, after getting the Restrained Static, I had everything I needed to summon the Celestial Champion. I could have fought him immediately, but I wanted to bring out Willow's full potential against this final boss. To do that, I dug up a bunch of green caps from the green mushy forest in the caves. These would allow me to keep my sanity low throughout the CC fight, which in turn would keep Bernie activated. The second way to increase Willow's damage was to change her affinity to Shadow. To do this, I paddled back to Crab King to retrieve some of the purple gems that he dropped, and used all the moon rocks that I'd been collecting to build a celestial portal. I then crafted a Moonrock Idol, which allowed me to return to the Character Select screen. Character Select lets you reset your insight. I kept everything the same, except I picked the 2 Shadow Affinity skills and spawned in as Shadow Aligned Willow. An added bonus to all of this is that I got a free lighter and Bernie, which meant I once again had a backup that I could drop as soon as the first Bernie perishes. I was now ready to make my final trip to Lunar Island, so on day 61 I paddled there, and after arriving, I set up a fridge to keep my thermal stones cold, left my beefalo on the boat, and used a scrap, moon gleams, charged moon shards, and celestial orb to summon the Celestial Champion. The Celestial Champion is a 3-part fight. He has 10,000 HP in his first form, and has 3 attacks, which are his Roll, Flail, and Gestalt Summon. They're all easy to avoid, especially if you have a bunch of speed boosts like I do, and Willow interacts with these moves no differently than any other character does. The main difference between Willow and the standard fight is that she has Shadow Aligned Bernie, dealing 60 damage every 2 seconds, and her Shadow Alignment plus the Reaper's extra damage to Lunar Aligned enemies means she's doing around 120 damage per hit, which is the highest DPS she achieves in this run. After phase 1 is defeated, CC morphs into its second form. It gains a bit of HP and is way more dangerous since its Blender attack and Gestalt summon can deal hundreds of damage in a few seconds. If I'm not careful, it is possible for Willow to get one-shot by these attacks, since if the Void Cowl breaks, I'll be completely armorless. Other than that, it's no different than the standard phase 2 fight. Once phase 2 is dropped, CC transforms into its final and most deadly phase. Phase 3's difficulty doesn't come from its HP, but rather its Spire attack, and the fact that it moves around a lot. The Spires flood the area with AoE traps that will reduce Willow's speed with grogginess, or outright put her to sleep. Willow actually has a counter to this, which is her Shadow Flame spell. Each of the flames deals 181 damage to CC, and can be fired from a distance, so it's a reliable way to deal damage even if the boss is camping on some Spires. The green caps that I brought are pretty much here for phase 3, since Willow's enlightenment will be going up really fast due to CC's aura, its lasers and the Spires, so I eat these from time to time in order to keep Bernie activated and the hordes of Wandering Gestalts passive. The Celestial Champion is finally defeated on day 62. With CC down, we've beaten all the raid bosses in the game. That's the Shadow Pieces, Fuelweaver, Klaus, Dragonfly, Toadstool, Queen, Crab King, the Twins of Terror, and CC. And we've beaten them using the unique Fire and Bernie abilities that Willow's new skill tree has to offer. Anyways, that's in my opinion how to be an S Tier Willow. Like always, if you made it to the end, thank you so much for giving this video a watch. Take care and have a great day.